In the records of medieval history, few endings have proven as revolting and terrifying as the death of Baldwin I, the first Crusader king who ruled Jerusalem. This was a warrior who had seized the Holy Land by force of arms, who had filled his enemies with dread, and who had been celebrated throughout Europe as a true defender of the Christian faith. Yet when death finally reached this powerful king in 1118, it came not amid the splendor of combat, but through a slow, festering, unbearable rot that turned him into a living dead man long before his last breath. The year was 1118, and the Crusader states had only just secured a fragile grip on the Levant. Baldwin ruled from Jerusalem, a city wrested from Muslim hands barely 19 years earlier during the First Crusade. The region remained a tinderbox of rival powers, where Christian principalities founded by European lords stood uneasily beside older Muslim states determined to take back what they had lost. Baldwin's reign had been one of endless war, calculated marriages, and the constant tightrope walk of keeping European backing while ruling over a population that was overwhelmingly non-Christian. He had won his crown through cold pragmatism and battlefield skill. Born Baldwin of Boulogne, he had followed his brother Godfrey on the First Crusade. But where many crusaders burned only with religious zeal, Baldwin possessed a sharp, opportunistic mind that spotted advantage amid the turmoil of the East. He first carved out the county of Edessa for himself, then seized the throne of Jerusalem, becoming a king who governed as much by fear as by admiration. His court blended European lords with local officials, a clear sign of his talent for adjusting to the tangled demands of ruling conquered lands. The chain of events that led to Baldwin's ghastly end started during what was meant to be a straightforward raid into Egypt. In spring 1118, the king led an expedition to extract tribute from the Fatimid Caliphate, a campaign that revealed both his hunger for gain and his kingdom's endless need for money. The outward journey passed without serious trouble. Yet on the march back across the Sinai, Baldwin was suddenly overcome by what chroniclers of the time called a fierce and abrupt sickness. Today's scholars suspect either violent dysentery or acute food poisoning, ailments all too common, and frequently deadly, on medieval campaigns. What started as stomach cramps and bowel distress swiftly grew into something far worse. Within days his state collapsed. His belly began to swell at an alarming rate, ballooning grotesquely as infection tore through his insides. The king's skin first turned a deathly pallor, then shifted through a sickening spectrum of colors as poisons flooded his blood. Those who recorded the events wrote that his body soon gave off a smell so vile that even his most devoted retainers could hardly bear to enter his tent without gagging. 12th-century medicine had no answer for such a ferocious internal assault. Baldwin's doctors, limited to the meager knowledge of their age, could offer nothing beyond prayers and useless herbs against the bacteria that were already devouring his organs. As the infection raged on, his abdomen kept expanding, the skin stretching painfully over the gases and fluids produced by tissue rotting inside him. The king who had once embodied strength and command was reduced to a swollen, scarcely human parody of himself. The effect on his followers was crushing. These were seasoned fighters who had seen every horror of war, yet they could not stomach the sight and reek of their monarch putrefying before their eyes. Servants cast lots to decide whose turn it was to go inside the royal tent, and even the losers could stay only moments before the stench drove them retching into the open air. Baldwin himself stayed conscious through most of the torment, a captive inside his own decaying flesh, fully aware of his monstrous change and the revulsion he now provoked. As the illness reached its peak, fluids began to seep through his skin and every natural opening. The pressure of trapped gas and toxins forced its way out wherever it could, turning the once proud king into a leaking vessel of corruption. Even the restrained language of medieval chroniclers struggles to hide the sheer awfulness of the scene. William of Tyre, writing years later, recorded how the royal tent became unlivable, forcing the attendants to hang curtains soaked in incense in a hopeless effort to mask the overwhelming odor of rot. Baldwin's final hours came almost as a relief to everyone. When he died on April 2, 1118 near the fortress of El Arish, his body was already so far gone that immediate burial was impossible. The desert heat had sped the decay, and his remains had to be moved with the greatest caution to keep them from falling apart entirely. Yet even after death his corpse continued to shock. While preparing him for burial, the built-up gases and fluids exploded outward, spraying putrid matter in every direction and horrifying even the hardened men handling the body. News of Baldwin I's death sent tremors through the Crusader states and far beyond. A king who had seemed untouchable in life had been humbled not by sword or plot, but by the betrayal of his own flesh. Medieval writers wrestled with the meaning. Some called it God's judgment for his harsh rule over Muslims, others a trial of faith he had failed. The practical fallout was immediate and severe. Baldwin left no clear heir, plunging Jerusalem into a succession crisis that would weaken the kingdom for years. His gruesome end became a moral lesson in chronicles across Christendom, proof that death levels king and peasant alike, that earthly glory is fleeting. The vivid reports preserved by contemporaries give us an unusually clear window into medieval views of sickness, mortality, and divine will. They also remind us how helpless even the mightiest were before infections that modern medicine would treat with ease. Baldwin's fate was not unique. Disease killed far more Europeans in the Levant than enemy blades ever did. The scorching climate, strange food, and filthy conditions of campaigning bred exactly the kind of infections that consumed him. Modern doctors looking at the symptoms, sudden onset, massive abdominal swelling, discoloring skin, overwhelming stench, recognize a catastrophic bacterial invasion, probably sepsis complicated by something like necrotizing fasciitis. The body had begun decomposing while he still breathed. Today antibiotics and surgery would almost certainly save him. For people of the 12th century, who explained illness through sin and humors, watching a king rot alive shattered every assumption about power and divine favor. That his corpse then burst open at burial only deepened the sense that something unnatural, almost apocalyptic, had taken place. The chroniclers themselves, usually careful to protect royal dignity, found the horror so overwhelming that they set aside convention and wrote with rare frankness. The tension between their formal style and the raw physical detail makes their accounts uniquely gripping. Word of the Crusader king's hideous death traveled quickly along pilgrimage and trade routes, feeding both fascination and doubt back in Europe. To some it proved the Holy Land had lost God's blessing, to others it was a call for renewed zeal. Either way, the story entered folklore as a grim warning against pride. Muslim rulers were swift to use it as propaganda, proof that Allah had abandoned the Christian occupiers. Baldwin II, who took the throne after his cousin, inherited a kingdom already ringed by enemies and now haunted by whispers of divine anger. More than 9 centuries later, historians and doctors still pore over the symptoms, debating the exact microbe responsible: cholera, tainted rations, some especially vicious desert bacterium to which Europeans had no resistance. What is certain is the brutal contrast: a man who bent nations to his will, undone in days by enemies too small to see. The detailed records left by men like Fulcher of Chartres and William of Tyre ensure the episode was never forgotten. Their willingness to describe the indescribable gives us priceless insight into medieval medicine, court life, and the ever-present shadow of death. Above all, Baldwin I's end stands as one of history's starkest reminders that crowns and conquests mean nothing when the body fails. In a matter of days the conqueror of Jerusalem was reduced to a stinking, bursting husk, an image medieval writers preserved so that no one, then or now, could forget how thin the line is between glory and decay, between king and corpse.